Hi, my name is Taylor Cordova, and I will be talking about the photographer Robert Frank. I will be discussing the background of Robert Frank, his career background, as well as giving you an analysis of some of his photos, drawing from Lester's perspectives. Moving on to his background. Robert Frank was born in 1924. His parents were Rosa Frank and Herman Frank, and since he was in Switzerland during that time, World War II was going on. Despite him being free, he had an ongoing threat of Nazism over his head, which kind of affected his thoughts and opinions on oppression. He became a professional photographer at the age of 22, and he made his first handmade book of photographs called 40 Photos in 1946. He later immigrated to the United States in 1947 when he got a job in New York City. According to Britannica, he is one of the most influential photographers of the mid-20th century. Now, going into his career background. As I said, he immigrated to America when he got a job in New York, and that job was Harper's Bazaar, which is a fashion magazine. There he worked as a fashion photographer, and he didn't really enjoy it because as a fashion photographer, he found out he had a lot of limitations, and he was just wanting a more creative freedom, a more artistic freedom in his work, so he quit that job. He later started working freelance for magazines such as Life and Vogue, doing freelance photojournalism as well as freelance advertising photos. Now, after he was kind of done doing that, he got a Guggenheim Fellowship, and he started traveling across America between 1955 to 1956. And he just took pictures of very iconic symbols of America at the time, such as jukeboxes and diners and highways and things of that nature. And when he when he took those photos, he later published them for a book called The Americans, which is a book of all of his photographs from that trip. Now, The Americans had a very controversial beginning because of how Robert Frank took the photos. Now, as you can see, all of the photos are black and white, kind of grainy. The photo at the bottom in the middle is kind of crooked, and so it was very controversial at first, and The Americans is characterized by having a bold composition as well as being a social commentary. At the time, there are a lot of set technical rules that photographers abided by, and Robert Frank kind of just threw those rules away and made his own, and it kind of stuck. Now, despite Frank taking pictures of iconic symbols of America that a lot of people could relate to, the feeling that the audience got, according to a website called rc.net, they got a deep feeling of alienation and even separation when looking at these photos. Now, even though it had a very controversial beginning, the book now is very famous, and it is actually a revolutionary book because Robert Frank broke all of the rules, technical rules, that were being followed at the time, and people still appreciate and even try to replicate the feeling and the technical style he used when he took these pictures. In 2015, in fact, the New York Times named Robert Frank the most influential photographer alive. So obviously he is still very important, and his work is very influential. A journalist called Sean O'Hagan said The Americans was shockingly and enduringly influential because it simply showed things as they were. And as you can see in these two photos, it doesn't look like Robert Frank tampered with anything. It doesn't look like he tried to place his subjects in any particular order. It looked like he simply took his camera out and took a picture. And it was even stated that Robert Frank didn't use any artificial lighting in his photos that were published in The Americans. So he was very simple in that nature. Now, moving on to Lester's perspectives. I think this picture Robert Frank took draws from the technical perspective because, as I just stated, he did not use any artificial light or shadows, so you can see that clearly by looking at the picture that there is no artificial lighting, that is just pure sunlight, and that gives the audience a feeling of more authenticity, and I kind of think that's what he was going for in this book, and that's what actually made it a hit, was the lighting. Moving on to the second perspective. I think this photo, it draws from a cultural perspective. Not only does it draw from a cultural perspective, I also believe that this is a social commentary. This picture was the picture that convinced me that this whole book was a social commentary, because at first I didn't think anything of it, but then after looking at it for a second, you see that the American flag is hiding another person's face. And to draw from the cultural perspective, the American flag is a very important symbol to America of freedom and independence and patriotism. And Robert Frank uses that to hide another person's face. And in my opinion, that can be interpreted as America oppressing people. Now, I think this goes along with the cultural perspective because he uses an object that conveys much meaning to our society and uses it as a metaphor for something else. And I think it's a social commentary because he uses it as a metaphor for oppression. Lastly, I will talk about how this photo is categorical imperative. Now, categorical imperative means that once a rule is established, it is always applied. And if you look at all the pictures in his book, The Americans, they all follow similar rules. Now, they don't follow traditional rules, and I think all of the pictures are grainy, black and white, kind of crooked, even blurry. And I think that is a categorical imperative perspective because once he started that, he used that for all of his photos in The Americans. And there is no photo that looks any different than any of the others. Once he applied that rule, he kind of just stuck with it and used it throughout the book. Now going into riffing. So this on the left is a picture I took of my dog, and on the right is a picture Robert Frank took. Now I wanted to pay homage to Robert Frank by making my picture a little bit grainy and blurry. Now I did incorporate artificial lighting because I was inside, but other than that, I didn't really do anything else to the photo. I saw my dog playing with her toy, and so I took my camera out and took a picture of her. And I adjusted the ISO and things of that nature, but other than that, I didn't really do anything, and that's what I was trying to replicate. But one perspective I would like to draw from here would be a cultural perspective. I think a lot of people have dogs at this time. It's stated that 89.7 million people have dogs in their households in the U.S., so I think dogs are a cultural meaning or a cultural stamp to America. Now, to the second picture that I took, this is a pot boiling water, and I incorporated a crooked style in this picture like Robert Frank and The Americans. Now, I did use artificial lighting, but I think that artificial lighting kind of adds to the feeling I get in this photo. Now, since most of the background is black, since my stove is black, I think that the artificial lighting kind of just gives the feeling of loneliness or even eeriness, and I think that the lighting draws from the technical perspective. Now, I did try to do some of the same things Robert Frank did, but I didn't want to replicate him exactly, so I did use color in my pictures. And I wanted to use colors to signify that this is modern times now. When you think of old times, you think of black and white, and that's what Robert Frank was going for, but I wanted to use color to signify how cameras have changed and how times have changed now. In conclusion, Robert Frank is still an influential photographer. He incorporated Lester's technical, categorical, imperative, and cultural perspectives in some of his photos, and I incorporated a technical and cultural perspective in my photos. Now, Robert Frank did revolutionize the way photographers take pictures, and even though I tried riffing him in some ways, his style is very unique, and I think that I should have just left it alone. So I did incorporate some aspects, but I didn't want to rip him off completely. Thank you very much.